I think we are 2 minutes past, so we will make a start. So thank you very much for coming along and giving up your lunch times. Very excited to have Professor Richard Crisp with us here today. So I'll just introduce myself, say a little bit about Richard Crisp, and then I'll invite him to talk about all things behaviour change. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Dominic Ridley-Moy, and I run the Behaviour Change Network as well as co-chairing CIPR's local public services group. And I run behaviour change training for comms professionals and provide support to run behaviour change campaigns. So very, very excited today to have Professor Richard Crisp here with us, and he's going to talk about behaviour change theory and how it can be applied to enhance the effectiveness of internal and external communication. So some very practical tips, which I'm really excited to hear about. So just to introduce Richard, Richard Crisp is one of the UK's most influential behavioural scientists and the founder of Durham University's Behavioural Science programme. He's currently editor-in-chief of the Journal of Applied Social Psychology and was most recently Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Provost of Durham University. Richard's consultancy work includes pioneering approaches in behavioural communications, and he is an author of a number of books, including A Social Brain and Social Psychology, A Very Short Introduction. So just in terms of housekeeping, it's the usual etiquette, so we will record the event. Feel free to drop any questions in the chat as we go along, and we'll pick them up after Richard has finished speaking. And the event will be uploaded to the Chartered Institute of Public Relations, to their CPD database, so it will be worth 5 points. And also, one of the things I'll do in a second is I'm going to drop details of Richard's newsletter into the chat, which is a really good way to bring behaviour change theory to life for people who aren't necessarily experts in the subject. So without further ado, Richard, I will hand over to you to talk about the science of the art of persuasive communications. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Delighted to be here. Got about 20 minutes to talk, so I'm going to take you on a whistle-stop tour of the science of the art of persuasive communication, and then we've got plenty of time for questions after that. So hopefully it's going to be a useful session. There is an art to persuasive communication, as we all know. We're all artists on the communication canvas, if you like, but increasingly we also understand there is a science behind it, the science that helps us understand how do we get our audience to engage with our messages, how do we get our comms to have impact, and how do we affect lasting behavioural change. And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I've spent 30 years studying this kind of thing, and increasingly over the last 10 years, as Dominic says, I've been helping organisations in a practical way hone their communication strategies to affect behaviour change, whether that's enhancing communications with the internal audience of employees, or whether enhancing communications for clients or customers. I even had a chance to apply these things to my own organisation last year as Deputy Vice Chancellor and Provost. That was one of my responsibilities, was internal and external communications. And I'm going to give you a few examples from those experiences today to hopefully try and bring some of these principles to life. So I'm going to talk about these experiences, and I'm going to focus on 4 key nudges, if you like, that you can use in communications. And these are, there's hundreds of them, but these are the 4 which I think are really useful as a starting point, and 4 which I use in every single communication that I write. So let's go for science of the art of persuasive communication. Let's see if this is going to work. Is this going to work? Yes. Okay. So we've all heard of nudges, right? You know, it's been around for 10 years now, and you know, increasingly part of all aspects of daily life, and particularly how we communicate things. And you know, I just picked off. We've got the COVID inquiry going on at the moment, and of course, behavioural science, nudging was a key part of that. I'm sure you all know of the sorts of examples of nudging. Lots of famous examples now. For instance, if you put a mirror behind a breakfast buffet, people tend to take the healthier options. We all know from when we stay in hotels now, they don't just tell us to not put the towels out every day. They tell us that 90% of their customers keep their towels for 2 or 3 days before putting them out to be washed. All very familiar with these. These road signs, direct result of behavioural science advice. People respond far more quickly to images, so smiley face, frowning face if you're over the speed limit, than those kind of like big do not speed signs. And things like, if we want people to do something, don't send a round robin email addressed to everybody, because no one's going to do it. You get something called a diffusion of responsibility. Address it to them personally, and then you get a far higher compliance rate. If you really want people to do something, you handwrite it, but we haven't always got time for that. And this is my favourite example, just to illustrate why we should all be interested in behavioural science. This was a pilot by HMRC carried out a few years ago. I'm sure many of you have heard of this. Tax return letter. In some of the letters had a single sentence at the top, something like 90% of people in your postcode have already returned their taxes. They found that single line, 10 words or something like that, led to an increase of about 25% increase in the speed with which people paid their taxes. And they estimated if they rolled that out nationally, it would save about £200 million. So that's not a bad saving per word. And it really just shows the power of behavioural insights, nudges, behavioural science, whatever you want to call it, applying this knowledge to the words that we write, because they really can have a profound impact on how people engage with messages, the impact that messages have, and the extent to which people will respond to that message in a positive way. So nudging in a nutshell. We know this, right? We don't interact with the world objectively. There's all sorts of bias. We're nudged all over the place all the time. We're influenced by seemingly incidental aspects of our environment, which allows us to make quick judgments based on gut feeling. So, as examples I've just given, these are, seemingly incidental, a smiley face by the side of the road, a mirror behind a breakfast buffet, things like putting a pair of eyes above recycling bins makes people recycle more. These seemingly incidental aspects of the environment change people's behaviour in profound ways. And it's actually, if we stop to introspect on that, it's about gut feeling. The whole point about nudges is we're not engaging in any sort of deep systematic thought about these things. They just nudge us one way or another. Why are we doing this? I mean, it's always good when we think about applying behavioural science to think, well, what is the point of these things? Why have we, as humans, evolved to react like this to our environment? The point of nudges, and it's always good to hold this in your mind, they make it easier for us to navigate the world. We don't have time to, in everything that we do in our daily lives, to just process everything that we see, every decision that we make, to spend huge amounts of time thinking about it. We just don't have time to do that. It's not an efficient way to be. We won't get anything done. So we create shortcuts. We learn shortcuts, and that's what nudges are. They are shortcuts to help us make quick decisions, which are, they are biased. They're not necessarily going to lead to always going to lead to the correct outcome, but they're good enough, and that's what these gut feelings are. It's a gut feeling. I don't need to process this in depth. I can just make a quick decision, and most of the time they get us to where we want to go. Harnessing these environmental triggers, these gut feelings, is the basis for nudging, and I'm going to argue today is perhaps one of the secrets of effective persuasive communication. So I'm going to talk about 4 broad principles. As I say, these are principles which I apply in everything I write, and I find them incredibly useful for getting the message across and seeing people engage with that message in a positive way. The first one is fluency, processing fluency. The meaning, the relevance of the ducks being carried away on a stream there will become relevant in a moment. What is fluency? Or fluency is quite simply, it's the ease with which we can process something, the ease with which we're able to think about something. If something is really hard or complex to get our head around, we're far less likely to engage it. So on that level, it's pretty straightforward. So fluent text, fonts, really clean, the same ink, that sort of thing. It all contributes to processing fluency. Hang on, where am I? So here's some examples. I saw that this was, I was in one of the colleges in Durham last year, and I saw that this had been put on one of the toilet doors. And fantastic initiative, right? Trying to get people to save water, absolutely something that we need to do. But from a behavioural science point of view, this is a fascinating sign. It gets some things absolutely right, but some things not. So in terms of processing fluency, one of the things that we know is really important is the amount of information. If there's too much information, if the information is presented in lots of different ways, then and if it seems complex, people are just not going to engage with it. So some wonderful ideas here, like all this information about how much water we waste. It's in the shape of a drip coming out of a tap there. There's another tap going into a pea bank. So many wonderful inventive ideas here. The trouble is there's too much of it to really engage with people, and so the danger there from a processing fluency point of view is that people just don't, they'll see it, they'll think, oh, that's interesting, but they won't read it or engage it. It won't have an impact on their behaviour. So it's too much information, too many complex ideas. There are some really good things here. People respond really well to images. They tend to respond to images better than text. So images are good, infographics are good, and a really important part of fluency is consistency of message. So this is about saving water, and it's blue. We've got a blue background, so that's really good, because that's if it was green or if it was red or something like that, it just wouldn't work. So some really good things here, but overall quite a complex way of presenting that message. Here's another one. I've done some work with NHS Blood and Transplant. This is wonderfully fluent. So this is a leaflet, handed out to encourage people to give blood. It's incredibly high in perceptual fluency, processing fluency. Really simple, large, clean text. There's no doubt what it's asking you to do. Really easy to process, and you've got that consistency, perceptual consistency with the colour as well. Blood, we all associate red with blood. So really nice, clear example of something which is a perceptually fluent communication. We're all obviously familiar with COVID. These simple steps, colours, approach saving lives, red. Okay, yep, absolutely, that works. Protection, blue siren light. So everything here, reduce the amount of text, really clear messages in steps. Everything is coherent and consistent. That's what perceptual fluency, processing fluency is all about. So the first rule, the first key thing to think about in persuasive comms is making sure you get perceptual processing fluency. It's got to be there because it cuts to the heart of what our minds are trying to achieve. It's always good to know why are these things important, because it helps us apply these things. So things that are easy to process, we know there's evidence for this. So things which are high in processing fluency instill a positive mood. And that tends to bleed out into the judgment itself. So we feel good when we get something, when we can process something more easily. Our brains are efficiency machines. We're always looking to be able to make decisions in an efficient way, which uses the least amount of energy. And so we feel good when we process things really quickly, and this makes judgments to hand more positive. It's also the case, there's lots of evidence for this as well, that easy to process statements are more likely to be perceived as true as well. So there's this general kind of positive halo effect. Now, the reason why perceptual processing fluency is so has these positive benefits is rooted, in our evolution as a species. Fluency, the feeling of fluency, the feeling that something is easy to process, is essentially an impression of familiarity. In other words, when we recall something, when something is familiar to us, we've experienced it before, it's high in processing fluency. And so this is a gut feeling that makes us think that whatever we're seeing, whatever we're thinking about, we've been experienced before, even if we haven't. It's that gut feeling. If something is easy to process, it's therefore familiar. In evolutionary terms, if something is familiar, that means it's safer, and we're gonna survive for longer. So there's an absolutely sort of visceral, fundamental reason why we like things that are familiar and easy to process. It keeps us safe, and this is why processing fluency is such a powerful tool in the communications toolbox. So fluency, this is the first one, and I like to think about fluency as answering the question for the audience's point of view, is asking, is this something worth paying attention to? Is this grabbing my attention? Does it feel right? Does it feel familiar? Is it worth paying attention to? And that's something which we want them to say yes. Second thing I always sort of think about is the framing of the message. Framing is absolutely fundamental to not just processing messages, but the whole of our perceptual system. You've probably seen this illusion before. It's the Muller-Lyer illusion. We all know this, I'm sure. Top line seems longer than the bottom line. Of course, it's actually not. And this is because our perceptual system has learned that when there are converging lines, like in the top example, this means something is further away, and so our perceptual system adjusts to compensate for that. So it knows that even though it's hitting the retina, it looks the same size on the retina, because those converging lines are telling us that it's further away, we perceive it as bigger. So this is our whole, fundamentally our perceptual system is built around framing. We don't interpret the world objectively. We're always putting a spin on it. We're always seeing it through a particular lens, and we're always modifying how we see things. Framing has an impact in many different judgmental domains. For instance, we know that people tend to eat less on smaller plates. In other words, if research has shown that if you put exactly the same amount of food on two plates, but one is bigger than the other, then people will eat less of it on the smaller plate, and they'll feel fuller quicker because it will seem like more. Restaurants often have a really ridiculously expensive option on the menu, lobster or something like that, which they might not even have in stock, but it makes everything else seem really good value. And going back to some of the classic social psychology on this, framing changes how we process information. It changes what we it makes us selectively process stuff. Really classic study here. Many replications of this since in different ways. Participants shown a video of a woman getting ready for a dinner party and having a dinner party. Half of the participants were told she was a waitress, half of them were told she was a librarian. The ones who were told she was a librarian in the subsequent recall test remembered that she was wearing glasses and eating salad. The ones who were told that she was a waitress recalled that she had a bowling ball and was drinking beer. All of this information was there, but we selectively process information depending upon the frame, depending upon the information that we have received prior to processing. This is really important for persuasive communications because it means what we're trying to convey is a function of what's gone before. This is a study from the 1950s, one of the first ever studies which kind of contributed to what we now know as nudging. Two personality variables given to someone, and they're asked, well, what they like. Someone who's described as industrious and stubborn, and then you ask them, what do you mean by stubborn? They say, well, they're steadfast and determined. However, other participants who were told that someone was envious and stubborn, and then you say, what do you mean by what does stubborn mean? they think it's closed-minded and rigid. In other words, exactly the same word, stubborn, is interpreted in completely opposite ways depending on what's gone before. And that really illustrates the power of framing. So in any message that we're crafting, we should always be aware that what's gone before in the message, or even the context in the organisation at that particular time, everything that is happening around that message will frame how that message is interpreted. And in fact, my latest newsletter this week gives a good example of that. Framing is the third one. Framing. To recap, framing, the kind of second nudge, the second rule, is what aspects are worth paying attention to. Fluency is, should I pay attention in the first place? Okay, yes, you've decided you're paying attention, but what are you going to pay attention to? How are you going to interpret that information? How it's framed will be absolutely key to that. Third one, scripting. Most of the time in persuasive communications, by definition, we're trying to get people to change behaviour, trying to get them to do something. And scripting is all about giving them the correct the clear signpost to what to do. If we're not telling people what to do and giving them a clear way to enact that behaviour, or making it more difficult for them to enact that behaviour, or if there are obstacles in the way which stop them enacting that behaviour, then our message is not going to achieve its objectives. NHS blood and transplant, again, is another good example. We want you to give blood. Okay, great. So I really want to give blood, right? That's you've got the motivation there. But what do you do? I mean, actually, if you've never given blood before, and actually this is under certain context, maybe you're a bit nervous about it. What do you actually do? It always helps to give people a clear script, concrete script about what to do. And this is what they do in this leaflet. Clear steps, and again with infographics, so it's really, really easy to process. It's easy. You don't have to be uncertain about it. There is an absolute clear set of steps that you go through to do this. You haven't even got to think about it. And it's we see this successfully in all walks of life. Even things like getting the simplest script is a coffee loyalty card. What do? You just keep going back to get those 9 stamps. That's a script. So giving people a script is something we are tuned to follow scripts. We like following scripts because we haven't got to think about them. They're efficient. Our brains are looking for efficient ways to behave, to save us time. If there's a script, then we can just follow that. So the really important thing about scripting is it enables us to move from abstract goals to concrete steps. And this is really, really fundamental. Abstract concepts and many organizations have core abstract values, and absolutely, they serve a purpose, but abstract values are really broad. They don't contain any behavioral information. If you want people to change their behavior, you've got to give them a concrete script. So you can convince people that they should be recycling, they should be saving energy, they should be saving water, but unless you tell, and that's great, but that's an abstract ideal. You've got to give them the steps to help them do that. So in health psychology, we know, for instance, that people are far more likely to get healthy if they form something called implementation intentions, if they form a script for how they're going to do that. So rather than just getting them to believe yes and agree they should do more exercise, get them to form scripts of how they're going to do that. So I'm going to go to the gym at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday. This works because concrete scripts have more anchor points in memory. In other words, as you go through your daily life, you remember them more, and you remember the steps to go through, and we just follow on from one another. There's also a motivational element of this. Thinking through something, imagining something, going through the steps of something kind of makes you feel you've already started doing it. And that's really important because it means you're already on the journey. That's why when you get like a coffee loyalty card, they'll give you 2 or 3 stamps to start. That is absolutely to make you feel like you're already on that journey. You're already committed, you're already invested, right? And so if you move away now, you get something called cognitive dissonance. So you've invested something, but you haven't followed through on it. And so So scripts are, they kind of serve as scaffolding for the behaviour change that we want to achieve. So giving people those concrete steps and helping them to on every way of that step is a key part of enabling persuasive communication. So scripting is, I like to think of this as, how should I respond to the message? So you've got them to pay attention, you've got them to think, yes, I agree, I need to do something, but then that you still got to give them a scaffolding, you still got to help them along that journey. That's what scripting is about. And finally, norming. This is something, again, which is pervasive, right? You know, you'll see this in advertisements all the time. A growing number of people are switching to our shampoo. Take that HMRC example at the beginning. 90% of Solihull residents have already paid their taxes. There is a social norm here. Everyone else is doing it, right? This is really powerful. 8 out of 10 cats prefer whiskers, for anyone who's old enough like me to remember that. 8 out of 10 cats. The majority of cats do it. So, you know, that makes you haven't got to think about it, right? If that many cats like whiskers, my cat's probably going to like it as well. In the same way, you know, we live in a democracy. Right? We are attuned to the majority being something that, okay, yeah, that's probably the right thing to do. It's everywhere, right? You're probably buying your Christmas gifts off Amazon, or indeed any other retailer at the moment. What do we do when we look at things like Amazon or TripAdvisor? You don't just look at the rating. Okay, a key part of Amazon is what have other customers said about this? What star rating have they given it? If something's got a 5-star rating, 5 out of 5, but only one person has bought it, you disregard it, don't you? Because there's no consensus. You'd rather go for something with 4 stars, but 2,000 people have bought it. So it's not the rating. So the rating is less important than the consensus norm behind it. It's the amount of consensus which is the powerful motivator for behaviour. Facebook, I mean, you know, Facebook is you know, grounded on, you know, the absolutely fundamental starting point of Facebook was, do you like what I've posted up on this, or on, you know, on Facebook? What is that? And you know, people are motivated to get more likes, right, for what they're posting. That is consensus information. It's seeking consensus information, and that's, you know, one of the reasons I'm sure why Facebook is so successful. Many energy companies now do this. You know, you can see how much energy you're using compared to your street, right? It's one of the most powerful ways of getting people to use less energy. No one likes to be the odd one out on things like using energy. You don't want to be using the most energy on your street. You want to be, you know, it's a norm that everyone agrees with. We should be using less energy, and so it's one of the most powerful ways to stimulate behaviour change. Advert for KFC. It's so popular, it's permanently on the menu. So popular, you're conveying consensus information. Train line, 94% of our customers use e-tickets. Okay, really powerful. Everyone else is doing it. So, oh, you know what? I'm going to do it. Richard, what are other people in your area watching? Okay, well, yeah, okay. So there's lots of other people doing it. It's consensus, important consensus information. You can bring all these together. It's called social impact theory. More easily interpreted, I think, as like a light bulb model. And so bringing all these things together under norming, any communication can be more powerful if you combine or think about how you can use these different ways of conveying the consensus. It's number, strength, and immediacy. So think about the number of people who are doing something. Let's say giving blood. If it's just one of your friends has given blood, well, you know, actually that is a powerful incentive. But if all of your friends are the only person who hasn't given blood, then that's going to be an even stronger incentive for you to carry out that behaviour. You also pay attention to the strength of the person giving the message. So if it's a doctor telling you should be giving blood, as opposed to great blood, you should be giving blood, as opposed to your neighbour, you're going to pay more attention to the person who is more has got more social strength in that context. In other words, they are an expert or a celebrity or something like that. And finally, it's immediacy or proximity, right? So we care far more about we're far more influenced by people who are more, closer to us in time and space. So if all of your neighbours, everyone on your street is given blood that week, you're gonna be compelled to do it, far more than if 95% of Australians have given blood over the last year. Okay, fine. There's all sorts of reasons why it might be different in Australia. From your point of view, it's your street that matters. So norming, I sort of think of this as how important is this? How compelled are you to carry out the message? How much does this matter? Just to finish off, so I've given a number of examples all the way through. I applied exactly these things to a challenge in my own organisation last year. So it was a particular ranking, university ranking exercise every year, and in this particular ranking, Durham had been falling for the last 5 years, from 78th down to 92nd. And actually, if we went into the below 100, this had really significant financial impact consequences for the organisation. So it's really important that we changed that around. We did change it around, and we got back up to 78th. I did that through applying behavioural science, because the primary determinant of this I worked out was engaging with our staff. The way that this particular ranking system worked was we needed to elicit nominations, basically, and that came from academics, and we had 4,000 academics. We needed them to be working for us, to going out and eliciting those nominations. Now the problem was, what would happen every year is there'd be this kind of like rather dry email coming through from an administrator saying, we need some names, please can you fill out some names, da, da, da. We weren't really getting any back. No one was really engaging with this. So I thought, okay, what do we do? What do we do to change the way that we're communicating with everybody in the organisation, to get them to really see this as an important thing to do, and to go out and get those nominations? So first of all, I applied framing. So I explained, and this was just in one email, I explained that you've been asked to do this. Actually, the reason why you're asked to do this is because fundamentally this ranking changes the value of Durham University. In other words, if you get a high ranking, then this means being at Durham University is a high status, high value place to be, and so it's collectively this is important for everyone's identity. So provided that framing effect for the message. Secondly, I looked at immediacy. Immediacy. So how relevant was the person asking you to go out and invest some time in changing your behaviour? Well, it was over the last few years, it was a kind of mid-level administrator sending this message out, and asking a whole bunch of academics in the organisation to do something. So it's someone from a different part of the organisation asking people doing a different job in the organisation to do something. So it wasn't that immediacy or relevance to the person asking. So this year, me, an academic, asked other academics to do something which had academic importance. So I made sure that the source of the message was relevant and immediate, in line with the light bulb model. Secondly, strength. Again, I, as the Deputy Vice Chancellor and Provost, emailed every single member of staff and asked them to do this. So again, that was in that context, applying social power to make that message more effective. But perhaps most importantly, I gave people a script for how to respond to this. Previously, we asked people to give us a name, an email address, and an institution. Okay, that's quite, and so if you're not, especially if you're not particularly invested in doing something, that's a whole bunch of stuff that you've got to stop what you're doing, stop things which are probably more important to you, and go out and find some information and send to an administrator somewhere in the organisation. You don't really know why you're doing it. I just said, you know what? Don't worry about the email address. Don't worry about the institution. Just give me a name. In fact, hit reply right now with that name. That's all I want. The first thing that comes to your mind. making it so much easier, giving people a clear script, an easy script to follow to respond to this. What it led to was a 500% increase in responses, got 5,000 nominations, and we ended up doing better than we've done in this ranking for 5 years. And it was all about behaviour change and framing the communications in a way which would engage people and get them to see the importance of something, engage with it, and have the impact on behaviour change that we were looking for. So in sum, fluency. When you're crafting your communications, think about fluency so that your audience knows it's worth paying attention to. Think about framing so that you get them to attend to the right parts of the information, or indeed see it in the right way. Scripting gives them a clear set of steps to go through once they've accepted the message, and norming, and get them to feel this is something I really want to respond to. As Dominic said, I think he might put it in the chat already. I do have a weekly newsletter where I just run through all of these sorts of things, really simple introductions, and there's opportunities to just ask me questions about it as well. So hopefully, please do take a look. It might be useful as you go on your behavioural science journeys. And Dominic mentioned some of my books there. If you're really at a loose end, then they're available too. I should also say, just to finish off, that most people choose that one in the middle. Thank you. See what I've done now.
Thank you so much. That was a really great summary of behaviour change theory and bringing it to life. So that was really, really useful. So we've got time for a few questions. We may run over slightly, so there's some great questions in the chat. So I'm going to kick off with, I'm going to pick up on Daniel's question first and kind of bring in another question to that. So Daniel was talking about what materials or resources would you use to grow people's understanding, and then I'm going to tag on a question to that. Is really, I suppose, when people are planning behaviour change campaigns, just to sort of think about where do kind of people start? Have you got any kind of tips? So lots of people on the call are from the public sector, so they're facing challenges like recycling, climate change, health, managing debt, foster care, those kinds of challenges. So really just to get a sense of what kind of resources are out there and tips for people starting out with behaviour change campaigns and applying the theory.
Yeah, sure. So so absolutely. I mean, not to plug my own newsletter, but that's absolutely what I'm there for, to try and give people a really simple starting point. And a resource that anyone can access to get them started on that journey. But I mean, to be honest, I mean, you can just Google this, and it is, you will see if you Google behavioural science and saving water, behavioural science and saving energy, behavioural science and saving more for retirement, then you'll get some examples come up. You might have to sift through a fair amount of stuff out there, and of course there are a number of consultancies now which offer advice on this, but the more you search through, the more you'll find things. You can, of course, there are books. I mean, what I would say is there aren't many books on behavioural science. I mean, there's the classic Thurman Sunstein Nudge book, which is quite nice as a general introduction. But if you want to sort of really understand the theory behind this, and understand why these nudges work. And actually, I would always recommend that as an approach, because I think what many people find is nudges don't apply to every single situation in the same way. There's always some tweaking or some matching of the nudge to a particular situation. So they're not magic bullets in that respect. The way to become a nudge expert, if you like, is not just to know about every single possible nudge, but to understand the theory behind it. And that's where introductions to social psychology in particular are useful, because all of these nudges are based on fundamental processes of human social psychology. You know, how we attend to other people, how they have an impact on this, and all of those things that you see in the news, all of those things that we're hearing about in the COVID inquiry, they're all based on, you know, social psychology from the 1950s. So if you go to like a basic textbook, you'll soon see and become, you know, get that sense of familiarity when you see some of those classic studies being described.
And I'll also share some resources in the chat. So we've got another couple of really good questions just around the ethics of nudge techniques and what we should all kind of consider as communicators when we're going about using behavioural theory.
So, you know, this is something I get asked a lot. And I always respond, and this is, you know, I've always found this to be the case. Nudging is a bit like being hypnotized, right? You can't be hypnotized if you don't want to be hypnotized. And it's the same with nudging. You know, you can't change stuff. Nudging is not about changing someone's attitude. Nudging is about helping them enact the behaviors that that reflect the attitudes they already have, but that they're for all sorts of reasons, you know, not enacting. So, you know, most people want to save more for retirement. Most people want to save water. You know, most people want to recycle. And so these are all things that people want to do. But the trouble is we don't do it because we're rushed, we're stressed. It's not easy for us to do. There's always barriers, what I call negative nudges, stopping us doing the things we want to do. You know, of course we want to do all these things, but we don't do them. And nudging is about removing those barriers and making it easier to fulfill our goals. You know what? If you hate the idea of recycling and think it's a crazy, terrible idea, you ain't going to be nudged into recycling. Nudging is about helping people achieve the goals they already have, not about changing what those goals are.
Yeah, and I was just going to add on that point that actually I think a lot of the time it's probably like with any comms campaign that the main thing to get right is to thinking about what is the very specific behaviour you want to change and spending more time in that kind of, you know, what is it we want to get right? What behaviours do we want to change? And how do we want to change them? And then the nudges, it's like any kind of comms campaign, they kind of come second because it's you've got to decide what it is you're trying to do, what the barriers to change are before you go into the tactics. Right, I'm just going to look at some of the other questions in the chat. So someone asked about the nudge book, so I've put the link in there to that. There was also a question about, do you have any examples of a campaign or key messaging that uses all four of the points that you talked about during your presentation?
I don't know if that question came before I gave that last example, but certainly I did use pretty much everything that I discussed today in that in the email, the comms strategy for getting academics at Durham to engage with that ratings process. Sometimes some nudges will be more or less relevant in any particular situation, right? You know, so it depends on what is it, you know, Dominic, I think you said, you know, it depends on what you're actually trying to achieve. That's the first question. And it might be that, you know, you apply all those things, but it might be that you think there's some selectivity needed. I mean, I would say, look, processing fluency is always something which is going to help. But, you know, sometimes you do also need to provide detailed information, but there's ways of doing that. You know, it could be done on a click-through or something like that, but you've got to get people's attention first. You know, depending on what you're doing, scripting will be more or less relevant. Depending on what you're doing, norming will be more or less relevant. So you'd always need to look at a specific question, and that's what I do when I'm working with organisations. The first thing is working out, well, what is the actual end point of behaviour we're trying to change, and we tailor what we're doing accordingly. I should say, you know, this is part of a broader strategy, and it's really, really important. You know, knowing nudge theory is the first step, but we also always need data, and I would say never uncritically just apply a nudge and hope it's going to work. There's two elements to this. There's understanding the theory, understanding the techniques, and then fitting them to the particular context you're in. And that's where you learn through piloting and pre-testing and what have you, just on focus groups or whatever, or a small section of your client base or your organization, getting feedback, working through, does norming work in this context? Does scripting work in this context? Does, how could we, how can we make, how can we frame this differently? Because that data is always going to be important to fine tune and make sure that the particular nudges you're using in your context are indeed going to make things better.
And I think that leads on quite neatly to, we've got a question from Simon. There's two parts to it. So is trying to establish why the target would want to perform a behaviour, is that key in developing influence in messages? And then a second question around, what does the role of tactical empathy play in persuasive communications?
Tactical empathy, that's a lovely, lovely expression. Yeah, absolutely. So, sometimes the reason why something isn't being some behaviour isn't being enacted is because it's not understood as to why you would want to do that, right? We don't do things unless it's obvious what those benefits are going to be for us. To give you an example, what I used there, one of the key problems was no one understood why it was important for us to be providing these nominations. And so a key thing there was to explain why, why we needed to do this. We need to. This is why we're asking you to do this, because these nominations feed into a process which has a direct implication on your self-esteem, because it reflects on the esteem of Durham as an organisation. So sometimes these processes have to be sort of spelled out and explained as to why it is a benefit. Now, it's entirely up to the individual then to disagree with that, or say, actually, I don't agree with that, or I don't care. Of course, absolutely. But part of it is actually providing information as to why you're doing something, providing that transparency, because then you're gonna get that buy-in. Tactical empathy. What's the context? You got to give a bit more context for. What's the question again?
It was, what does the role of tactical empathy play in persuasive communications? So it's quite a broad question.
So empathy is absolutely central, because in fact I wrote a blog post on a newsletter post on this this week as well. So about taking the perspective of your audience is absolutely critical. You've got to understand where they're coming from, because otherwise you might be talking about something which just doesn't just doesn't gel with them. I mean, I gave an example of a CEO who'd been on a tour around Asia, Singapore and New York, Hong Kong, sort of flying the flag for the company, and something which is then sort of put out on communications. Rightly so, in some ways, great, they're flying the flag for the company, and it's not an easy thing to do, and jet lagged, and it's awful, and it's terrible. But your audience might just see, oh, okay, CEO's off on another jolly again, getting a nice sort of trip to Hong Kong in the sun. They don't see all the hardships, but because they're at home, cost of living crisis and all the rest of it. So empathy is absolute perspective taking empathy. Understanding how something is going to be seen and read from your audience perspective is absolutely critical. I mean, one of the things I always do is I give what I call a perspective proofread. So I, as well as proofreading something for, grammar and spelling and everything like that, I imagine that I am the audience or someone in the audience reading this, and I imagine reading it from their perspective and think about, well, is this actually, is this, is this going to connect with me? Is this actually going to annoy me? Although there might be lots of positive things being said, is it insensitive? Always, I always, take that, do that perspective proofread. So in that respect, yes, that is tactical empathy. Empathy is not something which, of course, empathy is something which we can feel spontaneously, but it's also a cognitive tool. It's something which we can do. This is not to say it's a negative thing or a cynical thing. It's something which we should try and do. The more we cognitively engage with putting ourselves in other people's shoes, the more we understand things from their perspective, and the more effective we're going to be at writing communications which help those people meet their goals.
Right, I'm going to move on to another question. We're going to go through till 2 o'clock, and then we'll stop there. So we've got a lot of questions, which is great. So question from Charlie. Are there any other methods to consider if trying to lead people to make a big decision rather than a smaller change? So things like quitting smoking, drinking alcohol, rather than what to have for dinner, and what the kind of the theory and the steps are behind those kinds of changes?
I mean, what I would say about, in some ways, no. I mean, fundamentally, the processes are the same. But with big decisions, what you always want to be doing is breaking it down to smaller steps. So it's going back to the sort of scripting idea. Yeah. And the reason is, I mean, we don't like making big changes, right? Our brains have evolved to create this model of the world, which is safe and secure, right? That's that is the if you like, I make this argument in my book. This is the primary goal of the human mind, is to make sure that we know what's coming next, because if we know what's coming next, we're safe, and we're going to live for longer and all the rest of it. So in that respect, if we suddenly, making a big change to your life is, is like walking into the unknown. I mean, it's, the whole, you probably heard of system 1, system 2, everything about the brain. System 1 is about sort of learning, a whole bunch of kind of learned rules about the world, and then following them, implementing them in system 2. And we don't really it's hard to change them. We get, and a lot of the biases that you hear about, confirmation bias. So where I talked about this today, where you librarian, waitress, you process the information depending on what's gone before. You also process information that supports your existing view, and you do that because we don't like change. There is something called the status quo bias. It's really hard to change, because change means departing from that safe model of the world which we've spent years crafting. So big changes, by definition, are hard to achieve. And so that's where scripting comes in. So you remove the decision from being, you're making a fundamentally massive decision about how you're going to live your life, which is a big abstract decision, which we know doesn't really work anyway. And where do you start? And you break that down into those concrete steps. So it's not about, you want to get more healthy, right? But actually, don't think about that. Don't even think about getting more healthy. Don't even think about giving up smoking yet. What we want to do this week is, smoke, 2 or 5 less cigarettes, or, don't have a cigarette until, 11 a.m. or don't smoke in this particular context. So it's breaking down things into achievable steps, concrete steps, and describing them in behavioural ways. And then before you know it, then actually you've achieved that big change, but it's that big change which has been achieved in those small steps, because everything about the human mind is about avoiding big change, because we live longer if we don't step out of our safety zone. So it's but incremental change helps us to get there in a safe and secure way.
And I was just going to say, I think there's loads of great campaigns, particularly around smoking, where it's those kind of one small change. And actually, I always say to people that with smoking, a lot of the time people are wanting to run a campaign to stop smoking, but they're not running a campaign to stop smoking. They're running a campaign to get smokers to ring up the Stop Smoking helpline, which is a very different behaviour. And then when you do get into that, it's that kind of, actually with smokers, like the scare tactics of 10, 20 years ago don't work. It's that you need those incremental, short kind of things that are like one behaviour at a time. So we've got a question here around what are the formal study options for this topic? So that's a great question there for Richard. Do you have any options for people who want to study further?
Funnily enough, Durham University has this year launched a new executive masters in behavioural science, where you can learn all about these different techniques. And Durham already is one of the largest providers in the country for behavioural science postgraduate study in a kind of a traditional 1-year format after following on from an undergraduate degree. But we wanted to make this particular. I mean, what we always try to do at Durham is make this relevant and applicable and available to people who are living and working this stuff. And so the Executive Masters is a part-time program based around distance learning, so it's all kind of done online and that sort of thing, with a 2-week residential, something like that, over summer, I think, to visit the beautiful Harry Potter-esque city of Durham. So there are options out there.
Great, of course, example in framing.
Indeed.
So yeah, I think we've got time for one more question, and then Richard, you're always happy to answer questions. So if there's any questions we haven't answered, I'll share your contact details in the email after the event. So do drop Richard a line. So the last one we're going to have time for today is: can these techniques be overused, and can it become apparent to your audience what you're doing? Which is a great question.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm trying to think of some good examples there. I mean, in a way, I think some of those I did sort of a train line one now. You almost like become immune to it, don't you? It's like, oh yeah, okay, telling me that 95% of people choose this or whatever. So to some extent, yes. The more that people become familiar with this, they kind of know what you're doing. That doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to work. Of course, you should always tell the truth, right? So if you're saying that everyone on your street is using less energy, then that should be true. And so, although you might clearly know what they're trying to do with this, it's factual information, and that's fine. We should know the facts, and if information is always useful. As long as you don't use these techniques cynically, I think although people will begin to and increasingly know what they are, as long as they believe the information and they trust the information, then they should still be just as powerful.
Yeah, because I think there's an interesting conversation about kind of how supermarkets use it. So all the stuff in a supermarket that they want you to buy, if you put your arm out, it's at that height. So they use it for profit and things like that. But actually in local authorities and places like that, when we take something like recycling, kind of when you're running a recycling campaign in on the estate, for instance, and people are bringing their rubbish, their recycling down from the top floor, and you've rolled out an amazing communications campaign. But the reason that people are throwing away the rubbish in the wrong bins is because the bins are overflowing. That's always going to be a helpful thing to do. So I think we're going to draw it to a close now. So yeah, do get in touch with Richard if you have any further questions. There's lots of great questions about resources and things like that. So I'll share lots of things in the session. So I'd just like to say thank you very much to Richard for giving up his time. Thank you to everyone for coming along, and hope to see you at another event soon. Take care.
Thank you, Rob.
Bye, everyone.